Hi everyone. I'm just wondering if we are live now. If we are, can somebody just please comment in the comment section so that I can see that you guys can also hear and see me? Yes. Yes, we are live. Perfect. Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome to another episode of Fabina's Perfect Beer Talks webinar. My name is Inki and I will be your host today. Yes, somebody commented affirmative. Great, perfect. Hi, welcome, Omesh. And I'm Inki, I'll be your host today, like I mentioned. And today's guest is actually somebody who not only has an amazing experience in the draft and beverage industry on its own, but also the tech and innovation industry, which is something that especially us at Pabino are also doing. So intersection between the beverage industry and also the food, the tech and innovation industry. So Zak Manion, welcome to Perfect Beer Talks webinar.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, and really excited to share. So looking forward to it.
And I look forward to asking you all the questions and getting the insights from you and learning more about what you have experienced so far, and also what else you can tell us about tech innovation in the beverage industry on its own. So, first question, something that I asked to almost all of the guests we've had so far on Perfect Beer Talks webinar. Can you please share us a bit about your journey in the beverage industry and how you found your way to becoming the global director of tech innovation at AB InBev's Beer Garage company?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, name Zak Manion, right? I grew up. So I'm currently in Santa Clara area. I grew up not far from it in a town called Paradise. People may have heard of it because it all burned down actually several years ago in a big fire. But yeah, it's very close to San Francisco. I spent a lot of time in Lake Tahoe. I know that's gotten really big since I came back. Very popular place to go for skiing and snowboarding. So yeah, I grew up in a very small town. So in my early days, I had a lot of different jobs. I mostly it was around kind of like construction actually. So yeah, when I was in high school, I did a lot of jobs around like painting, building houses, building roads, and I don't know, for a lot of people maybe it sounds a little bit funny, but that was my interest. Was I enjoyed building things. It even got to a point where I suggested to my parents, maybe I just want to paint the rest of my life, and they recommended that I not do that. So I eventually took jobs in analytics just by kind of luck. I ended up in an analytics role in an advertising company, and in that job, I almost got fired actually because there was just like so much data that needed to be cleaned manually. Um, I got a warning and was told I'd be fired if I didn't fix it. So I went and figured out how to program actually. And over the weekend, I learned how to do some programming. I came back and I reprogrammed the whole system. And that was kind of like a turning point for me. It was kind of the realization like, wow, I can also build things. They don't have to be physical. So yeah, from there on, I kind of fell in love with data and analytics because I felt like there was just so much value you could create from it. Um, I then took a role in Shanghai. There was an opportunity to set up a team for an advertising company in analytics, in kind of the machine learning space in Shanghai. And from there, about 3 years later, so we did a lot of work I was really proud of. We did some of the first econometrics work for that company, which basically the idea of it is you figure out how to optimize media budgets and like advertising budgets. So yeah, I did a lot of work there in Shanghai in my first role. And then I ran into AB InBev. So AB InBev, I don't know if, I don't know if people, how familiar people are with AB InBev, but AB InBev has like Budweiser and Corona in a lot of markets. It has Hogarden, Stella. Yeah, so it has some of the big brands. I ran into AB InBev in Shanghai. I was invited to take a role in innovations and analytics. Basically, because I had the machine learning background, they wanted to see if there was some value we could create in the China and Asia markets. So yeah, I was there for 5 years. I then took another opportunity to come back to the US and do the same role in the US and North America markets and South America markets. And that's how I ended up in AB InBev as a technology innovation director.
Perfect. Well, that's quite a journey, and I didn't know that you started from in the construction industry, like the
Yeah.
but from what you told me, I saw that I learned that you are more on the creative side. In at least in the beginning, you wanted to do something more creative. You mentioned painting, and then you went on to analytics, which is not as creative when you think about it in like the general aspect. But then I see is that you also found a creative way of doing analytics as well. So basically, doing something from scratch is also some like creative, and coding and machine learning is also something that you have to create from scratch. So I think in one way or another, you are doing what you wanted to do from the beginning, just in a very different field. I'm
Yeah.
glad it took that turn, I think. So you mentioned that you did run but into the AB InBev company by accident. Of course, most of the people who view our webinar, by the way, are either professionals in the beverage industry or people who aspire to become part of the beverage industry. So I'm sure they know who AB InBev is. It's more than $100 billion company, so a huge company, and I think it's a very big role for you. And like you mentioned, you dedicated like 5 years of your career to leading positions in tech innovation. And I was just wondering, what are some of the lessons you have learned when it comes to intersecting innovation and technology in the food and beverage industry specifically?
Yeah, so a few things I kind of learned in those roles. So yeah, I was brought in to do innovation. I mean, with the machine learning background, a lot of the innovation was figuring out how to apply technology, which relies on, in many cases, relies on data or analytics in some form or another to create value. So yeah, that was kind of the connection between analytics and innovation. I was asked to do the same thing at AB InBev. Um, and there's a few key things that I learned from those roles. One, I think, so we try to do a lot of innovation within the retail locations.
Mm-hmm.
So either within a restaurant or a bar or in some cases like a shopping, like a, convenience store or superstore. So that was the objective. Um, and that was the key challenge for me. And I think like one of the crux of the challenges was there needed to be some value created for the customer or the consumer, and ideally both. And so if you didn't create that value, it was going to fail. It was just a matter of time. So I give you an example. One of the first innovations I tried, and it sounds like a little bit silly now, but it was early days for me. I had the hypothesis that so background, AB InBev has around 700,000 locations in China alone where they sell product. Yeah, they don't own the locations, not all of them. Most of them, they have relationships with those locations and just sell product. So that was a major challenge, was like, how do we get innovation into a place that we don't really necessarily own, right? So one of the ideas I had early on was, okay, if I could do something incrementally small, but on a large scale, I could create a very large benefit. So in particular, I thought, okay, maybe if I could optimize, just have like a playbook for the bars, restaurants on the environment that they can provide that would increase their beverage revenues. That could be a large impact. So to start, I thought, okay, I'll just test and see if I can optimize things like the sound in a location, if I can optimize the temperature, the lighting.
Okay.
So what I did was I went out, I bought a bunch of multi-sensors. Um, I bought sound sensors, light sensors, and I put it in locations. And I just checked to see if there was any correlation between the environment that was in that location and the sales. If I could find a correlation and if I could find some relationship, then I could share that kind of information to all the 700,000 locations. You could potentially have a very large benefit. So that got completely derailed because whenever I put the sensors in the locations, one, the bars didn't care about them. It wasn't going to create enough value. The bars and restaurants didn't believe it was going to create enough value for them to maintain the equipment. So the point at where I really gave up on this idea was I went to the location. I'd seen through the internet that my IoT devices were not up and running. So I went to the location and I checked the sensors to see what had gone wrong. I found that multiple sensors had been broken. And the reason why is because someone from the restaurant had taken meat juice from, I think it was like beef juice, and
Okay.
like poured it all over the sensors. Yeah, so it obviously wasn't creating enough value for the customer in that sense, and they're just basically doing whatever they could to get it out of their location. Um, I had similar issues where these devices, a lot of devices had USB thumb drives in them, just so I could collect more data, and those would regularly get stolen by customers and consumers. So I think that was kind of like key lesson was you still really need to create value for the customer consumer, or the product is not going to continue to exist in the location. Um, I think one other thing that was like a big learning experience for me was that if really important people, if I had a big idea and really important people laughed at me when I presented it, it was not necessarily a bad sign. So I think the best product that I ever launched in AB InBev, I won't go into the specifics because it's under patent and it's company confidential, but it had to do with creating an algorithm that sat in a process and just it churned out value. So I won't go into the specifics, but when I presented that idea, the first time I presented that idea, I presented it to someone who's now a VP in the company.
Okay.
Um, and that person laughed at me and told me I was going to get fired if I presented that idea.
No.
And eventually that idea went on to, it still exists. That product still exists in the company. It creates tens of millions of dollars for the company every year globally. And yeah, so I think really important big people laughing at you is I don't know if it's a good sign, but it's definitely not a bad sign necessarily. So those are a couple of the key things I remember learning a lot from while I was there.
That's all of them. All of the stories are very fascinating, by the way. And like from my experience, what I've seen, by the way, I did a, not a similar study, but I have a psychology background. So when I was studying psychology in university, I did a few articles and a few studies, and one of them was related to the food choices that people make when they go into the restaurant, depending on the types of stimuluses they get before entering the supermarket. So what I did was basically giving them flyers, and one of the flyers was filled with healthy recipes, and another flyer was filled with promotion codes for fast food companies. And according to the flyers they would get, then we saw that there was a correlation between the things they would buy at the store and the flyer. So if they got something related to like healthy recipes, they would go ahead and get something that was more healthier in the supermarket. But when it came to them getting the flyer with the fast food promotion codes, then they would go ahead and basically get only like beverages to from the supermarket, and they'll just go ahead to the McDonald's right across the supermarket store, and they'll just go ahead and eat from there. So we saw that, and we tried to convince a few supermarkets who are focusing most on the healthy food to do something similar, but it didn't go as planned as we wanted to go, and we were also young. But that reminded me, like that, your story reminded me of that. And by the way, at Pabino, with a smart tap in the beginning, so Pabino launched in 2016, and in the beginning, the smart tap was a huge taboo for most of the bars and restaurants that we would present it to. At least I started a year ago only, but from what I've heard from the older employees and also the CEO and the other co-founder of the company, some of them will say, "So what is this? Like, why do I need to tap a screen in order to get my beer? This is too complicated. I don't know how to use it." And a lot of people just give up on it until they saw what it would give back to them, until they saw the added value of the product. But it took a while, and it took a lot of patience on the side of our co-founders and the team who did a lot of the education. So they tried really hard to educate the bar owners, the bartenders, as to what is the added value of implementing technology on behind the bar, because we're so used to the normal taps. It's very difficult to basically break that mentality that this is how it's been done for centuries and this is how we should do it from until the end of the day. But no, there's always room for innovation. There's always room for something better in any type of industry, not only the beverage industry uh, in general.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but great answer. So, talking again about your role as director of marketing and technology in the Asian Pacific. As far as I know, you led a management and activation for over 1 billion customers. So, 1 billion customers, that's like a huge number. How did you manage to balance data driven strategies while also maintaining a personalized and authentic brand experience for consumers?
Yeah, so while I was in that role, I think the key challenge is just the background on what that role entailed. So the target for that role was, um, let's see, the target for that role was to create. So we had modeling set up that showed us how much money we were getting for our advertising. So if we
Okay.
spent $1, I think they were shooting for, I probably shouldn't go into the exact number, but yeah, obviously we were shooting for a positive return on
Okay.
investment of our advertising. So there was kind of like four different parts to that tech ecosystem in that role. There was the database of consumers, which was that 4 billion, well, it was 4 billion IDs, but 1 billion consumers. There was a loyalty program that was around 10 to 20 million consumers. There was D2C, direct to consumer, where we were selling beer directly to consumers through an app. It was very small. And then there was programmatic media, that was a very considerable size of considerable part of the tech ecosystem. So at that time, to be honest with you, the key problem was actually just managing that database of 1 billion consumers. Um, in fact, the total number of IDs that we had in that database, yeah, the total number of IDs was massive. So it was way more than the 1 billion consumers. And the reason why is because people were buying new cell phones at that time. They were buying cell phones all the time.
Mm.
Like the cell phones at that time was around 2017, 18, 19, 20. People were changing cell phones pretty often. Cell phones were cheap in China. So there was a lot of duplication in the data sets for that database. So to be honest with you, like actually, it probably doesn't sound super sexy, but really the biggest problem in that whole situation was the duplication of data and the amount of data that we had to manage.
Yeah, yeah.
The second problem that we had was activation. So this is kind of a common theme when you're working in China, but the regulations in China change very, very quickly, and they are like completely absolute. Like if the government comes out with, you know, some kind of legislature on the data and you
Mhm.
get it wrong, you're going to prison. So like I have several colleagues that I worked with in the past where they got something wrong with the data, the way they managed the data, and I don't think they're in prison anymore, but they got arrested. They showed up at the office and took them off to prison. So a big concern for me was kind of just like, how do I make sure that this data is okay? How do I make sure that I'm not like capturing any data that's not illegal or not, against the regulation? So that was the second big thing. The third thing was actually just activation. So that data that we had, the way that we used the data was we would share it with big advertisers. So big advertisers like Alibaba, Tencent, we wanted to advertise through them, and we wanted to make sure that we were using our data in a way that we were targeting the right people in our next campaign. So a lot of the job was also dealing with partners, like having a meeting with Alibaba and figure out how do we share the data for this campaign or that campaign. So I think actually the fundamentals in China were just a much bigger part of the job than they would be if you were doing the job here in, say, like the US.
I see. That must have been stressful though. Like besides having to do the job, you also have to think, I don't want to go to prison. So that's very stressful. But yeah, you did a great job. So you didn't end up doing any like having any problems in that area. I also know that you also launched a tech accelerator program. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it ended up becoming a very big deal in Asia with 500 startups applying only in the first year. So can you tell us a bit more about this accelerator program and the big success that it had and why you think it has such a huge success?
Yeah, so the context for that was when I took the role of Director of Tech Innovation in APAC. The objective for that role was to create value with partners, mostly with partners, either
Mhm.
externally or with other markets who had best practices. So a big gap in our approach was we didn't know any of the partners in Asia. Like you just get started, you don't really know who the startups are, who are the other accelerators, the VCs. There's not a really good way to get that done quickly. And
Mhm.
we had to get it done within the first half of the year because we had also had targets on creating value with new products by the second half of the year. So with that, we had this idea to launch an accelerator program where we would work with our internal customers and stakeholders to identify problems that they are having, and we would share that with the market. And the market being like startups and ideally startups and up and coming tech companies, and they would come back with solutions to those problems. That was the idea behind it. So we did that. We got the problem set. We launched it to the market. We put it in things like LinkedIn. We had launch parties where our VPs would present the problems and they would answer questions from tech startups. And we had a lot of we had a lot of partnerships. So we reached out to big accelerators in the markets that had relationships with hundreds of startups. And we spoke to them. We got them to present. We got them to have their startups participate in the program. And yeah, by the end of a couple of months, we had I think it was actually 600 applications, but we listed 400. Um, yeah, we had 400 applications where we're confident these came organically from the program. And yeah, within the first year, we had a very good idea of what the industry looked like. We had an idea of all the technology that was kind of moving around the markets. We had a clear idea of what we should be doing when we kicked off this innovation program in APAC. Yeah, that was
Mhm.
kind of it.
So basically, consistency was the key. You did all, yeah, that's a great. So we talked a lot about the Asian market, your work in Asia, but you also worked in the US market. And I was just wondering, what are the differences when it comes to the approach and of technology and innovation between the US market and the Asian one?
Yeah, so I think the differences in the ecosystems in the role in Asia and the US. I think by the time that I left Asia, um, China was starting to fall behind actually in tech. I mean,
Oh,
I think there was like 10 years, you probably remember, like where they were just
yeah.
flying, right? Like they had like Baidu, they had Tencent, they had Alibaba, and like it was just incredible the speed that they were getting. But after a while, like we noticed, like even within AB InBev, it was difficult to maintain that speed because like China's not building on anyone else. They're just copying every. For a long time, they were copying everything. Yeah,
Yes.
and then they started inventing like the social commerce. They've had some really big wins, like social
Mhm.
commerce, things like QR code order. That kind of came from Asia. It's like
Yeah,
QR code orders when you go to the restaurant, you scan a QR code, and yeah, that all kind of came from Asia. Um, but it was difficult for them to maintain that speed because China is not really building on other people's innovations, right? Like right now, if there's a Salesforce, and a lot of people use Salesforce, and then they build on top of it with new solutions, or they create the next iteration of Salesforce. Whereas China's just spent a lot of time kind of like replicating.
I see.
So when we were in China, I think a big part of the job was to bring best practices from other parts of the world or take some unique things that came from Asia and see if we could get other markets to use it. Like the QR code order, we try to do a large deal around QR code order where we acquire a company and then take that technology and move it all around. Whereas in the US, I found the US market to be much more focused on getting use cases to fit product market fit here. So I don't know. That's just been my experience. I think there's much more focus on how to apply products into the market the correct way. Whereas in China, there was just a really big focus on who are the right partners. Can we take this technology from outside? Can we reuse this technology? Just more technology focused. So I'd say that's kind of the dynamics between the two.
Yeah. So the US market is more consumer focused, you would say, rather than the Asian one, or
I felt that way. Yeah, I felt
okay.
like it
Yeah.
was it was more focused on creating value for the customer consumer.
Yeah.
Whereas, China it just really was technology focused and how do we catch up here and how do we like, take this tech stack or that tech stack, it's just that was kind of the big thing. Whereas in the US and the American markets, I think people were creating more value for the customer consumer. That was just my feeling.
I
I don't know if that
haven't.
makes
Yeah.
sense.
I haven't worked much for the Asian market, a little bit about for Japan and the Indian one, but for the US market, I've also noticed that they're very much focused on the value that they give to the consumer. So every time that I enter into a meeting, they're like, okay, but what is the value that you're adding to the consumer in general? So yeah, I have the same experience with the US market as well. Now, talking about technology and innovation, and somebody like you, I'm sure, has an idea at least of what the next 10 years will look like for the food and beverage industry, but specifically for the beverage industry. And I just wanted to ask, how do you see the intersection of technology and, and AI impacting the beverage industry in the next 10 to 15 years?
Yeah, so I think in like if I just do like a 10-year thing and then a 5-year thing, I mean, who knows? Like I think it's really difficult to say,
Yeah.
and I wouldn't want to be. I'll make a guess. I wouldn't be presumptuous that I'd be right by any distance, but just like keeping a little bit humble. But then I think a couple interesting things, like in the 10-year term. So I'm gonna take a bit of a contrarian view here, but I think that the idea of metaverse, even though I think it's like really, it's kind of gotten laughed at in the last year or so, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
not really turned into what it should have been. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think that metaverse has some big implications
Okay.
for physical locations in the future. So there's a few reasons why I say that. Um, One, I think if you look at like the gaming space, things like the gaming space have already been taking away from physical location consumers. You know, like online has taken away from physical locations. Like that's just a fact. So that's a trend that's inevitable, and I think it's just going to continue to continue on that direction. The second thing is for a long time, I think for a long time, metaverse, the challenge for metaverse was that the content creation was so difficult. Um, like there was no scalable way to create metaverse worlds. Whereas now you see things like generative AI are going to get to a place where they can iteratively just create their own worlds on command. And I think I've already seen some of these demos being done.
Mm-hmm.
So the third thing is there does seem to be this like unstoppable investment in VR. You know, like I think everyone thought VR was kind of dead for like people think about it's dead like every 10 years and just stays there. And now I think we can't ignore the fact that guys like Apple and Facebook are investing a lot of money in this technology. Um, so I think like all the fourth thing I would say is I know that from AB InBev's perspective, one of the key challenges that we had was online dating. So like
Okay.
a big reason for people to go out and like go have a beer or something like that was to meet people in a
Yeah.
physical location, right? So with online dating, people don't really have to do that anymore, and they can just like meet people online. Even if you're not dating, right? You can just meet people online and have discussions. So I think that like this ideal idea of like a digital space taking away from the physical space is a real trend that needs to be considered because all the tools are there. Like the VR is there, the metaverse content creation is there. Metaverse is going to create the space. VR has got the tools to enter the space. Um, so and there's that behavioral trend that we can't ignore. Things like online dating, we already see it eating into physical space. Um, so I think with those three trends, long term, 10 years from now, maybe 20 years from now, you have to consider the metaverse, like an idea of a metaverse bar, for example. We try to do this in Asia where we created metaverse bars
Okay.
around FIFA. And I think all the tools are there to make it happen. And then in the short term, in the 5-year term, I think one trend that you cannot get away from is, and Pubino is in a good place for this, is robotics in the retail location and reduction of human kind of service in a retail location.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think there's a few things that are happening. One, and it's a good thing for many people in like lower and middle classes, but wages are increasing consistently. And in fact, I've seen recent data show that wages for this group of people has increased faster than growth has increased. So actually their wages are in fact catching up to both to the very wealthy as well as like catching up to the prices.
Yeah.
So I think wages are going to get more expensive and it's inevitable. People are going to look for ways to reduce their costs. and robotics within the retail locations is the first thing that everyone kind of thinks of when they think about how do I reduce a cost. Um, so I think in the 5 year term, I think robotics you have to look at as an inevitable kind of an inevitable trend. And I think like fully digital spaces in the next, even if the spaces still exist, like going to a physical space and then entering a digital space with other people, I think is something you could consider happening. So in the 5 year, robotics, I think in the 10 year, you're probably looking, I think personally, like fully digital spaces, things like metaverses, potentially something that could happen.
That's very interesting. Actually, I forgot. I've been trying to remember the name of the investor since you mentioned metaverse, but there was this one investor who opened the first metaverse restaurant. I don't know what his name was. It did fail, like you mentioned. But in the beginning, he was hyped up very much, and he kept saying that, "Is guys, this is going to be what the future looks like. This is, how we're going to be dining with our friends and family in the future." But I will find the link and I'll send it to you after the webinar. But it's very interesting, and I actually saw like a short video of how it looked like inside the metaverse restaurant, and it was very fascinating. But to hear that you guys also tried doing something similar in Asia, but with the FIFA bars. So
Yeah.
did you guys test that? How did people react to that?
Yeah. So we did do the test, and we had this idea in Asia that, okay, while metaverse is like, it's very early. I don't think there was any hope that that was actually going to be scalable. We just wanted to learn from the
Yeah.
idea. So what we did was, we set up QR codes in the physical locations,
Hmm.
and through the QR codes, people could enter kind of like a gaming space. The idea was like supposed to be like a virtual space, but it was basically just like a gaming space. People could enter and they could
Hmm.
interact with other people in the bar. So the idea was that like we believed that we might be able to increase consumers' um, interaction with each other in a digital space more so than if we could do that in the physical space. Because yeah, I think in China at least, I think people are a little bit more reserved, so they stay in the groups. When they're in the bar, they just talk to each other, like maybe one or two size groups. They won't interact with other consumers. So we set up this digital space for them to interact digitally. The results were that we were getting about 8 minutes average time in the space, which actually was kind of surprising. I wasn't expecting that much time even, really. So yeah, we're getting 8 minutes average and for the average consumer in that space when they're in the bar. It's kind of significant actually. If you're 8 minutes and you're only there for like an hour, you spent 12% of your time in the bar just like on this game space.
Yeah.
The other thing we had was we were handing out NFTs because we wanted to. We were also testing like the idea of NFTs, and that was less so. We did have like 100% collection of the NFTs in that space. They were like FIFA like NFTs. Um, we did have 100% collection. I don't think it was like a big part of the value proposition. I think really the key was the 8 minutes and 8 minutes average, which was really interesting.
That's very fascinating. I'm very curious to see what's going to happen in the next 10 to 20 years. And I will make sure to DM you from LinkedIn or to send you an email saying you're right or this is what happened. So I just wanted to go a bit further from the technical part, your job, what have you've been doing so far, to asking you some questions more about your experience in Asia, US culture, your favorite draft beers, your favorite clubs, and stuff like this. So, first question to start this section is: how has living in a multicultural environment influenced your taste in beer? So, from US to Asia, how did that influence you?
Yeah, so I think when I was in the US, it was very popular to like IPAs and I mean, especially coming from Northern California, it's like just a very big IPA scene and like a very big microbrewery scene here.
Mhm.
So it's like very popular to just like that kind of beer. Um, and I'm not sure if I ever really liked it, but at that time I wanted to fit in, and so I just drank a lot of IPAs. um, but then when I went to Asia, um, there are places you can get IPAs,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think like 99% of the locations are selling like local pilsners, and they're
Okay.
very good. So like I know you probably had like Qingdao, um, you probably had like Qingdao, like the Chinese beer,
Uh,
Tsingtao. It looks like Tsingtao.
no.
It's like a green bottle. Um, yeah, that's the most popular beer in China. And in the U.S., if you get Tsingtao, it won't taste very good. Like it
Okay.
might now. At that time, it might now actually because maybe they improved their supply and logistics. But when I was before I went to China, I had Tsingtao. It was like not very good. When I would go to Asia, the pilsners that they have there are really good actually. So like Qingdao is really good. The Chinese one. Korea has a lot of like pilsners.
Yeah.
Like Cass is super good. Cass is AB InBev brand. Um, then if you go to Japan, right, like they've got Asahi and Sapporo, which are just super good as well, like really fresh and clean. So I kind of yeah, I kind of like changed my um,
Your taste.
yeah, I changed my taste. One, I wasn't so interested in being cool, and then two, uh, yeah, and then two, I just they have really good beer there. They really do. So
I
that was a big surprise for me.
I had a very similar experience. So being like I grew up with a dad who loves beer but not much of a drinker. Just while watching a football game he would like to have a pint or two, and he would always have Heineken. It was always Heineken or Corona, so I was always into I like Corona, I like Corona, I like Corona, but I didn't really know much about beer. And I would just say I like it because most of the people in Albania, where I'm from, drink Corona or Heineken. It's like those two beverages is what they like to drink the most. Especially I love drinking Corona at the beach. So the Albanian coast has a beautiful beach time, by the way. And I lived like around 20 minutes walk from the beach. And every summer I would go with my friends and we would just get like a bunch of Coronas and we would dip them in salt and we would put lime or lemon in it. And that was the most perfect way of getting refreshed on a hot summer day. And then I moved on and I started university. Everyone in Turkey was drinking Bomonti. Do you know Bomonti, by the way? I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's like either Tuborg or Bomonti. That's what they were drinking mostly, and Efes, of course. Efes is the drink the beer that you'll see in most households in Turkey. Efes is the biggest brewery in Turkey, and they do great beer. But most of the beers here are very like bitter. They have a lot of gas in it, and I don't really like that taste. When I came to Fabino, the CEO of Fabino actually treated me and he gave me around 30 different beers of craft beer, 30 different bottles of craft beer from all around the world. And I tried Asahi and I fell in love. I was like, oh my god, I didn't know beer tasted this good until I tried the Asahi. It was, I think, I don't remember. I think it was the dried version of their beer. Like I don't remember the name, but it was
Yeah.
beautifully made. It was so good. It was so smooth. And I also realized I like Napa as well. So beer that has a bit more like of a fruity flavor in it. So the more I learned about beer, the more I realized one, I had no idea about what beer was. I didn't know anything about beer. And two, there are so many different ways that countries and cultures produce beer. And there are so many different ways of enjoying beer in general. And I think going to different countries and, of course, tasting beer from different cultures is something amazing. And I've been enjoying doing it since I came with Fabino in general. So I just wanted to ask, do you have a favorite bar where you would usually go to in Shanghai?
Yeah, in Shanghai. So Actually, yeah. The favorite bar, I don't know if like I think when I went to Shanghai, I wasn't expecting this, but the Shanghai community is very international. So especially by the time I left, like the food and drink that they have there is, I mean, one, the Chinese food is incredible, but then the second thing is they have like really really good international food and drink scene. So like the Japanese food there, um, they had really really good Italian food. They had good like French food was really good there. Mexican was pretty good. So yeah, there was this one bar there, like a Danish bar there. Someone had set up, and yeah, they had craft brews there. They have this really nice outdoor scene where you can like sit and like you can hang out with your dog, and um, I really liked that one. It was just behind my house, so we'd go down in our like in our pajamas and like get a beer before I went to sleep. Or yeah, that was my favorite.
So it
You get
was more convenient rather than favorite, right?
Yeah, yeah. It was a matter of like one, it was convenient. It was just like right outside our house. And then two, it had this really cool outdoor seating area. It was just
Okay.
like had a really nice environment, especially like summer nights. And yeah, I just really liked that bar.
What about the US? Do you have a favorite bar in the area where you live currently?
So I go to a lot of dive bars here.
Okay.
Um, I like the dive bar scene. Like they have the karaoke's and you can sit and just have a drink and watch, watch all different kinds of people singing. And um, yeah, I prefer the dive bars in the U.S.
I love doing karaoke as well. It's such a treat. It's so much fun. And it's also like an exercise, to be honest with you. It's like you're having fun, you're singing, you're drinking, but you're also moving a lot and dancing. So it's very fun for me as well. Uh, Last two questions I have for you. One of them is, if you had to choose one city anywhere in the world for its unique beer culture, which one would it be?
Sorry for its unique what
For its unique beer culture.
beer culture.
Yeah.
Um, I think the most unique beer culture I encountered was probably in it was probably in Berlin. Um, like I really liked the Kolsch bars there.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean I like the idea you just sit around and I mean the Kolsch is really good anyways in Berlin. I mean I don't know how other people feel, but yeah, I think Berlin had a really cool like drinking culture. The Kolsch was really unique kind of idea and like hadn't had it before. So yeah, I don't know how you feel, but I would choose Berlin probably.
Yeah, Berlin and I think Czech Republic also has a very unique beer culture. Those are the two countries I know of. And then when it comes to Turkey, so Turkey's Mesopotamia is where beer first was invented in from women, something that most people don't know. And Mesopotamia is actually located in the side of Turkey, so they take a lot of pride for that. Um, so that's something that I found very interesting. Whenever you talk about beer with people like Turkish people or people, especially in Istanbul, they're like, oh, but Mesopotamia is a place where beer came from, and it's actually located in Turkey. So they take a lot of pride in that part. So when it comes to Turkey, the history is what matters a lot for them. But when it comes to the German, like Berlin and Czech Republic, they just love drinking the beer. Then they love sitting down and having fun and drinking that beer. My second last question for you is, I think, a difficult one, but I'm sure you can give a good answer to this. If you could change anything about the beverage industry, anything at all, what would it be?
Hmm. So if I could change anything about the beverage industry,
Yes.
Hmm. Yeah, that is kind of tricky. I don't know why it's tricky, but it just maybe because you proposed it as tricky. Now I got psyched out. If I
Maybe
could
I
change anything, yeah, if I could change anything, um, so I think that the beer industry is really, really steeped in tradition. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's has its good things and its bad things. Like you can main, like obviously it's really cool to maintain a drinking culture. But I think that the tradition, even like tradition within families and like tradition within brands, I think is something that gets in the way of people really enjoying like the actual beer product. Um, so for me, for example, you know, I've basically just drank IPA my whole life just because my family had a tradition of drinking IPA. You know, I wish that and you know, like when I was doing innovations, right? Like there was a lot of tradition when we would try and create value for customers and consumers. There was a lot of tradition that would get in the way of creating that value. So people have this perspective that you know this is just always the way that we did things, or this is always the beer that I drank, and this is all that I know, or this is the only brand that my family drinks. You know, I think it gets in the way of creating the real value for consumers when they just want to enjoy a product. So yeah, I think in some sense tradition is a great thing. Like we just talked about, you know, some of the favorite cultures the
Yeah.
drinking cultures that we have. But I think there's also the other side of that sword is there's like this very deep set entrenched focus on tradition that doesn't necessarily always create just good things for consumers and customers.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, you gave an answer that I swear that the CEO of Fabino always gives the same answer. He always says our biggest competitor is either the future or the tradition. Because just because something has been done for hundreds and hundreds of years doesn't mean it's necessarily good for us right now. It might have been perfect in the past, but there's always room for improvement, like you said. And with the work that most companies are doing, breweries and tech companies, I think that the future of draft beer, the beverage industry, is going to be a very nice and balanced intersection between tradition and also technology. I hope that's what I'm hoping for.
Me too. Yeah, me too.
Now, last question for you. If you had any advice to give to our viewers, listeners, what would it be? It can be any advice. It doesn't have to be about a professional. Just whatever you'd like to share with our viewers.
Okay. I'll share one that's completely kind of off the topic.
Sure,
But
sure.
I mean, one of my hobbies is playing pool. I don't know if I don't know if you know, I don't know how popular pool is in different cultures, but yeah, I like billiards. I like pool, and I played it my entire life, and basically my entire life. And I made a really big improvement in the last 5 years just because I found a coach.
Okay.
So yeah, so I think the idea of finding someone, if it's really important, I think the idea of finding someone that's really good at something and at least learning from them, I wish that I had done that in a lot of different things earlier on. You know, like I wish I had found I wish I had found myself mentors early on. I wish I had found myself coaches in the things I cared about. And yeah, I would have been able to enjoy like doing things better earlier on, as opposed to just like fighting things and like stumbling around in the dark for years. So that's just yeah, that's something that I've learned recently, and it's completely off topic,
No,
but yeah,
no,
just a random thing.
no, it's not completely off topic. I think it's actually a very great advice because, especially nowadays, we always think that we can learn anything, everything, and anything from the internet. So we forget that there is that human connection, and we forget that, you know, learning from other people, especially face to face, one on one, is something that we should not lose. I think it's a great advice. Thank you so much for sharing it. And thank you so much for being part of Pavina's Perfect Beer Talks webinar. If there is anything you want to share with us, please go ahead.
That's it. No, I just thank you for having me on, and yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you, and um, yeah, I appreciated the time. Thank you.
I appreciate you taking your time. Thank you so much for accepting to join our webinar. And hopefully, we can do this once again soon. Until then, all of you who are watching us live, thank you so much for joining, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.